Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back in with another video, and this is another episode of Your Questions Answered. If you're not familiar with this series, Your Questions Answered is a Q&A series that I do here on this channel, so if you want to see one of your questions answered in one of these videos, leave it in the comment section below. Make sure it's Lego, Star Wars, or Lego Star Wars related, and then check back next week to see if your question made the cut. As you can see, we have a bit of a change of scenery here. I'm actually shooting here on location at BrickFNatic in Austin, so if you guys are in the area, we'll be here today and tomorrow. So come through, see the mocks. It'll be a wonderful time, I assure you of that. But let's jump right into the question, shall we? First question comes from Isaiah Coulongs. He says, what are your opinions on the new confirmed UCS Rose Tico buildable figure for May the 4th, 2020? Now, I'll tell you guys, when I first heard the rumors of this, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that LEGO would restore the glory that is May the 4th by bringing us such an illustrious and beautiful set. But now that we have confirmation of it, I cannot be more excited for it. Back in the day, LEGO used to give us Revan and Admiral Yularen, and those were pretty good figures, but in recent history, LEGO has kind of stepped down from those high levels of products, and I've really been wondering, when are they going to take us back to the good old days, to the great old days? And LEGO says, you know what? How about we do you one better? We got a Rose Tico buildable figure for you, coming hot ready off the press. So all I have to say about that is, thank you, LEGO, for not giving us what we want, but instead what we need. Next question comes from Connor SWB. He says, what's the first LEGO game you've ever played? I had to think about this one, and it's either got to be Lego Island or Lego Racers on Nintendo 64. I feel like it might be Lego Island, but it could be Lego Racers. Both of those games were extremely fun to play when I was younger. Lego Racers was always very difficult for me. I could never beat that game. I think I actually went back to it when I was in high school, and I still couldn't beat it. So maybe I'll give that a try. That would probably make for an interesting series on this channel, a Lego Racers playthrough. Maybe I can actually beat the game this time. Who knows? Who knows? Next question comes from Spinjitzu Brick Production. He says, thanks again for using my intro, man. By the way, would you ever consider to make a Lego City mock like Jang Bricks? I mentioned this a few times, and I'll go ahead and mention it again because it is just that important to me. But absolutely, whenever I can get enough space to do Star Wars mocks and a large standing permanent display of a Lego City, I would totally do that. You guys can see from my channel that Star Wars is clearly my #1 priority, but if I wasn't doing Star Wars, I would absolutely be building a large-scale Lego City, and at some point in time, I would love to do both of them. So once I get in that position, I'll totally do it. I feel some pretty cool ideas for a Lego City. It wouldn't be your standard Lego City like you see where people will kind of make it modular and make it very grid-like and use like the Lego road base plates. I probably wouldn't use any of the Lego road base plates. I feel I would want to have something more natural, more authentic looking. So I do like brick built roads and buildings that are a little bit more dynamic. There'd be hills and stuff like that. And I really feel I could just go all in on a Lego City whenever I do start something like that. So sometime down the line, maybe if I ever start doing YouTube full time, that could be an option. But for now, so much of my time is taken up by the mock build series that I do. So it's kind of difficult to balance two large-scale mocks at once, especially since I don't even have the space for it anyways. But it's a great question. I like to reaffirm you guys that yes, a Lego City will come at some point on this channel. Next question comes from Carter Deering. He says, what are you most hyped for? Season 7 of The Clone Wars, Episode 9, or The Mandalorian? I think right now I'm probably most hyped for The Mandalorian. I think below that for me would be Episode 9, and then below that would be Season 7 of The Clone Wars. I'm looking forward to all of these things, but Mandalorian right now seems to be the most interesting thing that's coming, specifically because, it's so different than anything we've gotten before from what it seems. It's not a continuation of anything. It's a brand new story starting off kind of encapsulated in its own world, so it's kind of free from the expectations of like Clone Wars or even Episode 9. It can kind of really take a life of its own, and that's something I've been wanting ever since the beginning of Disney Star Wars, just brand new, fresh things in the Star Wars universe. Star Wars universe is very vast. There's so many things you can do in it, and it's nice to see they're finally taking advantage of it, giving us something that's not just familiar things, even though I guess Mandalorians are kind of familiar, but something that seems pretty hell-bent on being its own individual thing, and I appreciate that a lot. So Mandalorian is definitely the one I'm most intrigued about at this point in time. Next question comes from AJ Rogers. He says, will you ever try to put in a Lego idea set? I actually get this question quite a bit, And the answer of that, at least in the near future, is no. Because I work at a Lego store, I legally am not able to put in a Lego idea set. So that's why you'll never see anything like that from me. Like if Lego hosts a competition or something, I'm not allowed to enter it. So if you guys are wondering, like for example, I would have loved to have competed in that recent competition they did, the Lego Ideas Star Wars Battle Competition. It's like the perfect contest for something for someone like me. But because I work for Lego, I'm not allowed to participate in things like that. So I would love to, but at least in the near future, it's not something I'm going to be able to do. Next question comes from JB BrickFNatic. This is a long comment, but I liked it. He says, the way you answered the last question so seriously has me dead. And then he says, but I'm not sure why, since after meeting you at Brickworld, I can indeed confirm Jay is close to 9 feet tall. Told you guys. It was honestly so cool and terrifying at the same time to meet someone so huge. I mean, this is the body I was given. I gotta live with it. Next question, he says, if Lego ever made a Star Wars CMF series, what new molds would you like to see them make for different species? So there are just so many different species molds that Lego could do, and I have no doubt we'll probably get at least a few of these sometime down the line. But some of the ones that really stick out to me are Masamita species, the Chagrian. I think that would make for a beautiful looking custom head sculpt, and it would just be a really cool figure to have. You know, have him standing right next to Palpatine's minifigure. I think that'd look really good. I think a Quarren would also make a really nice looking minifigure. Especially since I feel we've seen them in so many different contexts. Like we've seen them as rebels, we've seen them as like senators in the senator meetings and the prequels. So that would be a really cool species head mold to get. And then an Abedito would be nice too. I'm honestly shocked we haven't gotten this one, given how prevalent that species is in the sequels. Like, it'd be nice if we got one. Especially, I mean, there's just so many uses for that species in these new films. So hopefully, I mean, if out of all these, I think Abedito was the most likely to happen anytime soon. But I think a head sculpt for that would also be pretty nice. So yeah, let's get a Star Wars CMF series. That would be really nice, just to fill in some of the blanks that we're missing with Star Wars characters or even just generic species. I would actually really appreciate that. Next question comes from Mellow Jello. He says, would you think a Coruscant Lego city setup would be cool? Like someone in their basement making a Lego city, but just Star Wars? Yes, absolutely. So I was just talking about how much I would love to build a Lego city, but if someone wanted to really take that to the next level and make it Star Wars themed, I think Coruscant would be the ideal candidate for something like that. Coruscant is so vast. I mean, there's so much you could do with it, with all the speeders flying around, all the buildings, all the locations we see in it, like the Jedi Temple, the Senator Building, Padme's apartment. I know that's one you guys appreciate quite a bit. So for someone to incorporate all those elements into a Lego city, but have it Coruscant themed, incorporate a bunch of lights, I mean, there's just so much you could do with that. A Coruscant mock is something I would love to do down the line. I just feel like it would be such an involved mock because the buildings are so tall. Like, you would need to, one, invest a lot of time in it, because you're going to be building pretty tall all the way around the mock, and you're going to have to come up with unique designs and ideas for all those buildings, the ones that maybe aren't necessarily things we've seen, but just buildings that you kind of have to fill in to make it look authentic to Coruscant, to make it look full, to make it look like a vast city. So I would love to do that at some point, but that's going to be a mock. Like, that would take, you know, at least a year and a half, maybe even 2 years to really get to having it look anywhere close to what we see on screen. But I mean, yeah, if someone's building a Coruscant in their basement right now, let me know. I'd love to check it out. I'd even throw that on the mock showcase if you guys have it. And the final question is going to come from Jedi Bob, and this is actually something I've really been wanting to talk about for a while. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make it its own video or make it like part of your questions answered, but he asked the question, so this is a perfect time to address this. And this is something I've addressed many times on live streams, but for you who have not been able to see that, this is a good time for me to maybe get that to a broader audience. But Jedi Bob says, please help me understand how Rey is a flawed character. I understand she had a rough past, but everything in the movie she does is almost perfect. And the fact that she can beat Praetorian guards with ease, and she beats Kylo in a lightsaber duel, and is able to use a Jedi mind trick, I think she's a likable character, just not a very flawed one. And this is a fair point. I mean, this is a point that people bring up all the time, and I have a few responses to this. First one being is that the first point he brings up is like, oh, she can beat Praetorian guards with ease. I mean, the Praetorian guards are really just henchmen, right? Like why not? Like, in Star Wars historically, the only people that give people with lightsabers really any trouble are other people with lightsabers, specifically other people trained with lightsabers, like the Sith, for example, in the prequels. So like, I don't understand why you would expect like, oh, the Praetorian guards would like beat her down or something. Like, I mean, I think it's totally fair that she can beat them. Like, who are the Praetorian guards? You know, Yoda literally walks in on the royal guards in episode 3, force pushes them against the wall, and that's the last we see of him. Like, I would like that was he didn't have to barely do anything with that. So I mean, I don't think there should be an expectation for those guys of all people to give her trouble. But then of course he brings up the point about Kylo. And here's the thing about that battle. There's a few things why you can't just look at it and say, oh, she beat Kylo. One, Kylo got shot. Not only did Kylo get shot, Kylo got shot by Chewie's bowcaster. We saw earlier in episode 7 that that gun was literally just making people fly across the screen. That gun was doing so much damage. Kylo took a laser bolt from Chewie's bowcaster, so he clearly was not at 100%. Like, he was very wounded in that fight. So you can't say it was a fair fight, both of them at 100%, because Kylo was clearly not at 100%. The second part of that, and I think this is the part that people actually miss a lot, is that the objective in that fight for Kylo was not to kill Rey. I'm sure if he wanted to, he could have. Like Vader probably could have killed Luke in Empire if he wanted to, but his main goal of that fight was not to hurt her, was not to kill her. It was instead to recruit her. He tells her, you need a trainer, like you need someone to show you the ways of the Force, and Kylo wanted to be that person. So, I mean, he was kind of like chasing her down, but he was mostly on the defense. And I mean, we see this time and time again when it comes to Sith. The Sith and specifically even dark side users of the Force, like their overconfidence is almost always their undoing. Like we saw this with Darth Maul in episode 1. Like Obi-Wan was a Padawan and he totally just like owned Darth Maul in that film because Darth Maul was overconfident. He assumed he had the fight won when he clearly didn't. At that moment, Obi-Wan got the best of him. I think that, I mean, if Obi-Wan and Darth Maul fought 10 times, Darth Maul would probably win like 7 or 8 times out of 10. But the Jedi, the way they fight, their principles, the fact that they use focus, they tap into the Force, they're not just fighting off of pure emotion, they don't get overconfident, that can oftentimes work in their benefit. And we've seen this happen time and time again throughout Star Wars. So I would really argue that Rey didn't really beat him in that fight. Like, yeah, she was the one standing tall, but insofar as Kylo's objective was not to kill her, you can't really say like, oh, they both had the same thing in mind and Rey like was better at combat than him. If anything, she caught him off guard. Like he didn't know how powerful she was and he just assumed, you know, like, oh, I have her on this cliff, like I'm going to get what I want. And then she taps into the Force and like really surprises him at that point. So it's not as simple as just saying like, oh, she's so perfect. Because once again, if Kylo wanted to kill her, I'm sure he could have. That probably would not have been a problem for him. We literally see him like a few moments before literally force push her up 20 feet into a tree. He could have done that again probably if he really wanted, but that wasn't his objective. So you can't just look at that fight in a narrow lens and say, oh, she beat Kylo, she's way too powerful. And the Jedi mind trick thing, I mean, I look at that as like Luke's moment in the Wampa Cave. Like, Luke was never trained to move things with the Force, at least not from what we see on screen. That was more so her just tapping into the Force because she learns what the Force is, and then the Force then helped guide her actions. That's the way the Force has worked through all the films. I don't understand why it would work any differently for her. So, I mean, she just taps into the Force, and maybe she's heard of Jedi mind tricks before. Like, she clearly knows of the Jedi. She thought they were a myth, but, like, I'm sure many tales have been told about the Jedi, and the idea of the mind trick has been floated around. So she probably was like, well, let me try this to get out of the situation. She didn't do it perfectly the first time. It took her 3 tries, but she finally did it, you know? So it's not like she's just doing all these things with ease and without any trouble. Like, clearly she's facing some opposition. The fact that, you know, she didn't just kill Kylo immediately, I think would imply that. So I think it's very oversimplified to just look at it and say she's perfect, because she's not. Like, Kylo Ren literally freezes her in midair on Takodana and makes her faint and basically kidnaps her at that point. If she was a perfect character, how would she let something like that happen? If you look at her even in The Last Jedi, like, she's so naive. She feels so compelled to attach herself to anything that she's like willing to overlook pretty toxic traits in people. For example, because she was like trying even at that point to ally herself with Ben Solo after what she saw him do, after she saw him murder Han Solo at that point. So, I mean, I can go all day and talk about reasons why Rey isn't perfect. I think people misconstrue the fact that she is like good in combat with her being an unflawed character. And the problem with that is that if you look at her upbringing, like she was raised on Jakku, presumably she's been fighting her whole life. She carries around a staff, for Christ's sake. Luke was never under those conditions. Like, yeah, he had to deal with Tusken Raiders from time and time again, but I mean, Luke wasn't fighting for his life the way that Rey was fighting for her life. So it makes sense that, you know, once she gets a lightsaber, she wouldn't just be totally lost with it. You know, even without formal training, she's at least been fighting with an object like that. So it makes sense that she would be at least somewhat good in that kind of combat. But I don't know. This is something that we can talk about and we can kind of go back and forth on. Those are really just my 2 cents on the issue. I think that saying she's not a flawed character is just really oversimplifying it, because if you look in the movie, if you watch the movie, you can see very clear instances of her not being a perfect character. But that's going to finish up the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little talking point at the end. I'd love to know your guys' point of view in the comment section. I'm sure tons of you will disagree with me, which is totally fine. I like to foster those types of conversations and debates because contrarily to what people say, I think we can have civil discussions and even disagreements as Star Wars fans. I think that's a good thing for us to do. But if you like what I do, go ahead and support this video by hitting the like button, support the channel by smashing that subscribe button, and I'll be back again very soon.